Monday, November 4th. The first thing we'll do is have a roll call. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos. Miss Amos? Charles City County, Miss Adams? Mr. Mitchell? Chesterfield County, Miss Smith?
Here.
Chair Smith, sorry. Miss Walker?
Here.
Hanover County, Mr. Vadunez?
I'm here.
Thank you. Henrico County, Mr. Yor?
Here.
Miss Smidler?
Here.
New Kent County, Miss Inman?
Here. Good morning. Afternoon.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Sorry.
Powhatan County, Mr. Chardine. City of Richmond.
Present.
Chair Clark. Miss Clark, I'm sorry. I'm gonna go back over and look at our numbers again. Miss Amos, are you able to indicate your presence? We have Miss Amos with us, and she has been moved over as a panelist, but I'm gonna go ahead and mark her as present. And that gives us 6 of our 9 localities, Chair. So we technically need 7 for a quorum. I'm sorry, we do not. We have a quorum. Pardon me again.
That's okay. You keep up with a lot of different groups, so.
All right, I will continue. I'll continue with the roll call for the non-voting members. GRTC, Mr. Adarkwa. Ms. Robinson.
Here.
DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Present.
Mr. Hudson. We have Mr. Hudson. I believe he hasn't moved over yet, but I will mark him as present. CVTA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
VDOT, Mr. Totten. Mr. Riblett. Ms. McAdory. Plan RVA, Mr. Bushing.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Dean. And Virginia Port Authority, Ms. Nelson. Ms. Nelson. Again, we have Ms. Nelson as well. I will mark her as present, and we do have a quorum. Thank you. We have Mr. Adarkwa with us as well. That concludes the roll call for attendance.
I was talking away and I was on mute. I'd already moved through number 3. I was on to number 4. So let's back up. Do we have any amendments to the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, which is approval of the October 7th meeting minutes. And I do apologize that I can't get my camera to work. So anyway, I'm smiling and happy to see you all. Do we have a motion for approval of the October 7th meeting minutes?
This is Amy. I'll make a motion to approve the October meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
Amy, thanks, Joe. All right, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, moving forward to item number 5, public comment period. Did we receive any public comments, or is there anyone joining us who would like to comment?
We've not received any requests.
Okay. Moving on to item 6, CVTA TAC Chair's report. I don't have anything to report. So moving on to item 7, CVTA Regional Project Selection and Allocation Framework. I will share a PowerPoint we've got for that, which was sent out to you before the meeting. So you've got that in your inbox. You didn't anyway, so. All right, here we go. So we're making progress. We've resolved a lot of the items. We'll move to what we still have on our agenda, which is one of the items is how about transit scoring. And last time we met, we talked about evaluating an additional measure for the transit category, having to do with activity centers. And Miles has run through a couple scenarios. Miles, do you want to share your screen?
Sure, I can share
Okay.
screen. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Okay.
Yes.
So just a quick overview of what we did based on the discussion last time. So as you recall, the approach is to look at activity centers specifically for transit projects. So this is the same information we shared last time. We buffer each project based on the type of project, and this is the process that was set up with the long-range transportation plan. And then we're essentially capturing the overlap with activity centers and using that as a stand-in for how much of that activity center is served in terms of the numbers of jobs and people. And so what we ran through was 3 different sort of ways that we could incorporate this into the scoring. So the first was to incorporate it as part of the accessibility goal that we already have, since it's measuring a lot of the same things that we're already measuring with accessibility. So the approach was to keep the weights and the goals the exact same as we have them currently, and then just add a 5th performance measure under the accessibility goal. And the first approach was to provide even weighting. So now that we're up to 5, just give each of them 20% and see how that shakes out. This is the test run with the projects that we had last time. So you can see that by having the activity centers, we do get a little bit of a score for the downtown transit hub that was not didn't have any points at the end of the last scoring, but it doesn't overall really change the order of the projects. Pretty much minimal impact on that one. The second option that we ran through was to put it under accessibility, but to try and continue with uneven weighting among the performance measures. So the way we have it set up currently, overall access to jobs and destination are weighted higher than the access to jobs and destinations from the environmental justice areas within the region. So we're looking at overall access for everyone, and that's worth more. But then we have a secondary measure that's more focused on equity. What this did was keep that sort of weighting with it more heavily. So half the score is just overall access. But then we added in the activity centers as another measure. And again, this one is rated at the bottom in terms of the weighting. And the reason and rationale behind that is really activity centers in a lot of ways are recapturing the same things that we're capturing here, because we're already capturing your access to jobs, goods and services. And by remeasuring activity centers, which are concentrations of jobs and population, we're sort of reiterating that analysis. So we gave it the least weight. With that one, you can see it closes the gap a little bit between the projects, but again, not much of a change overall. We do still see some points for the downtown transit hub, which we didn't have before. And then there's a third option, which staff feels is probably the best direction to go with this one, which was rather than sticking it under accessibility, adding a 4th goal category, which is that activity center connection. So what we did was reweight everything. Instead of the 38.5, 23, and 38.5, it was 30, 20, 30 to make room for that remaining 20% to go to activity centers. Within each of the three goals that already exist, all the measures and performance measure weighting stays the exact same as it is today. So it's just worth less overall. And then the remaining 20% would come from the activity centers. So on this one, we actually do see a little bit more of a benefit change. And it also, in this case, because the western extension of the pulse hit so many activity centers, we see a narrowing of the gap between the projects pretty significantly between the others. So it does have a lot more of an impact by including the activity centers as its own sort of goal weight category. And that allows us to sort of reflect that. And I think that was the goal, was to be more comprehensive and inclusive with that. So we felt that this one best captured that approach. So this is the one that staff is leaning toward. I'm happy to answer any questions on the calculations or any of the metrics, but otherwise I defer to the chair. I think I saw there's a
Oh,
couple
Todd,
questions. Yeah.
Did you call on me, Madam Chair?
I don't know what's up with my Zoom. Go ahead, Todd.
Okay, yeah, leave this slide up. So Miles, explain how safety is measured in this, because there's a huge gap between north-south and versus the other two projects.
Sure. So this one is based on and I think it should be the same in all the others, but the safety is basically the same as Smart Scale, but I think we're using weighting that might be a little older. So I think it was 85-1 on fatalities and serious injuries compared to property damage only crashes. So older weighting, but that's the metric. And basically the way that we calculate it for the transit projects is focusing on the shift in VMT from single vehicle toward transit mode. And I think in the way that this one just worked out, it was primarily just because north-south covered a higher crash corridor in that particular segment. And that's since they're all normalized relative to each other, that's where you wound up with the range that's very high on one and lower on the other.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of get that, but I know there's been a number of fatalities, including several pedestrian fatalities in this pulse extension corridor. So without knowing what the math is on the north-south, it just seems like a huge gap there. And I realize we're kind of looking backwards here, and I'm a little suspect of that measure.
Yeah, I don't know the data, but north-south, at least in the Chesterfield section, has fatalities, and we only have a little teeny tiny tail end of it. So
And we can
maybe
go
we
back.
can dive into that together offline.
Sure, we can absolutely go back into that. And again, the purposes of this was really just for the demonstration on what the activity center piece is changing. So, I mean, to Todd's earlier point, we could definitely look at it, but our focus is on the activity center right now.
Mm-hmm. Frank?
About yeah, thanks. So Miles, just a quick one. In terms of the third scenario, does that also include equity?
Yes, so the equity is still accounted for in the access measure. So it didn't change the so from these 5 that we see at the bottom table here, the jobs, destinations, jobs EJ, destinations EJ, those 4 are all still captured in the accessibility measure. It's just the activity centers are put into their own goal.
For option C?
Yes.
Okay. And maybe this is something we can talk offline about, because I do apologize. I don't have a full understanding of this. The way mobility and accessibility is captured, I would love to understand, how that is captured and how that is scored.
Sure. I'm happy to go into that a little bit offline, but in essence, mobility is focused on a person throughput. It's more of that congestion type of measure. Accessibility is based on measures of the number of jobs and sort of key services and destinations, schools, libraries, government services, grocery stores, those sorts of things. And it's how many more you can get to within a fixed amount of time before and after the project. So it's that change in what sorts of services and jobs you can get to.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk some more about this, if that's okay with you.
Yep.
Chair.
Dorona? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just have a quick question for you, Miles. The percentage, if you would go up one slide, maybe up another. Yeah, here. Okay, so this is the uneven accessibility. And then what was the percentage on, and those percentage categories, are those currently mimicking anything we use right now with those percentages?
Hey, Miles, I can pull up the table that's in the framework document. I think that might help people.
Yeah, that would be great. And I can stop sharing this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the intent though was behind it to try and mirror the weighting relative to the 4 that exist today. Try and mirror that, but then make space to include activity centers in there as well.
Oh, if I can find it. Window. I don't think that's it. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding my Word document in these choices. Shoot.
So I pulled it up quickly. So the current mix, so what we were proposing was 25 and 17 for each of those. The current balance is 30, 30, 20, 20. So so for each of the first 4, it's currently 30 for jobs, 30 for destinations. What did I say? 20 for jobs, EJ, 20 for destinations, EJ. So, and the difference between those was sort of what we were trying to reflect here by 25 and 17, trying to keep some sort of level of mirroring that we weighted one higher before.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time to pull up the document. I don't understand it. It's not coming up in my list to pull up. I feel like that would be helpful if we could show the framework document in that table. There you go. Thank you, Miles. So this is what we have currently. And the question was, should we put activity centers under that yellow accessibility grouping and have it be part of that? So that was the first option, right? And then the last option was to add a whole new column for the activity center as a measure. So that requires us to change the percentages under safety, mobility, and accessibility. So we've got some room for activity centers to be evaluated. Dorona?
Thank you. So my question is, looking at the mobility and accessibility categories, I just feel like that transit does embrace those 2 very heavily. And then how, because the safety thing, like Todd said, is a little alarming on how it's actually outputting good information.
Okay, so the proposal is I'm sorry, I keep getting dropped from the meeting. So if you could put the Miles, put the staff recommendation back up.
There we
The,
go.
I think ahead of it, where it's got the breakdown in percentages. Yeah,
Yeah.
so adding activity centers as another measure reduces safety and accessibility, and it puts 20%. So you guys are suggesting that maybe we reduce safety further?
Maybe to see how that looks. It's just as far as that skewing, I don't know if it's going to still do that, but I don't know what you need from us today, but I'll yield my time.
Todd?
Yeah, I think you're on to what I'm trying to, I think, wrestle with here, Barb, is and Dorona, is the safety just seems to be a not a great measure for these types of projects and seems to be giving some very
Too
skewed
much weight?
results. So I would support reducing safety and in some greater manner and then increasing the other three.
Okay. One thing to keep in mind as well is something that we mentioned, accessibility and activity centers as far as jobs and population kind of cover the same things. They're slightly different, but there is a little bit of double counting in there, I would say. So something to keep in mind as we're thinking about percentages. Chet?
Yeah, thanks. Just maybe to clarify, I don't think we said it distinctly, but this would create a new table for transit. So we would have three waiting tables in the document. Right now, transit is included with the highway and bike ped multimodal studies and PE only. So this would create a new one. So we would still have safety at the 38.5 for everything except for transit. And then we would reduce that, is what I'm hearing, and then we would add the activity centers, kind of like we did with the bridge. That's a whole separate criteria. We would do the same thing now for transit to have a separate table there.
Yeah, thank you. That was good clarification. Yep. Chessa?
Yep. Chet said what I was going to say, that and to keep in mind that transit projects will be compared to each other. So the way we do it is we do it by category. So if we feel it's more appropriate to have various breakdowns and measures of mobility or various accessibility mobility measures specific to transit, that's fine because we rank by category. So they would just be competing in terms of in the rankings with each other anyway. So
Okay. Do you guys feel, got dropped again. Do you guys feel comfortable changing the percentages, or do you want to see how it shakes out with some changes, using option C and getting a couple scenarios showing different percentages?
That would work for me.
Can we get maybe
Yeah, I
a
agree.
few suggestions then of how you might want to see those? Do you want to see 25% across the board? Or do you want to see safety down to 20? And then,
And Barb, I want to say that I think that we have to, if I don't know if we can agree on the percentages, if we're going to be able to relook at some of the the variables that we're going to be looking at. So for example, safety, I mean, I think about safety on transit all the time. So I think that I don't want to say, hey, let's make it 20%, when we could robustly add the safety measures that are used more in transit. So I would say maybe we look at those and before we can decide on a percentage.
Okay,
I just
so
they're good for, I'm sorry.
you're proposing changing safety in how it is evaluated entirely. Is that right?
I would think so, being that we have a new category. Just like we use the bridge, I think we could use the DRPT, something that's correlated with transit to more effectively show the outputs. Because I'm still, shocked with the downtown transit center and its skewy.
Okay, Tiffany, can you talk at all about how transit projects are evaluated for safety?
Are you referring to what we do typically with our grant applications?
Yeah, that's probably a good start.
So for our capital projects under merit, we actually only identify safety as like additional weights. Usually our capital projects, if they're related to something of this nature, they really are focused more on sort of the data that we would collect in terms of ridership. I'd have to dig a little bit more in terms of how we do that, but safety is usually not a key component because a lot of our projects are more around replacement or useful life. So I might have to dig a little bit to kind of look at that, but it's a little bit of a hard component because typically we're not collecting kind of the same related safety data that you would have for highways, such as well, there is some crash data that is reported by transit agencies, but that's not something we usually include in our scoring process.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe one of the options is to not even include safety as a measure. I think Dirona was up first.
Yeah, just quickly to add, just maybe also putting this on GRTC. I'm sure that they have performance measures for some of these and would be helpful to this process as DRPT is kind of larger, as Tiffany's explaining. So I think even looking towards GRTC and some of their performance measures that they use might be helpful for this process.
Okay. Amy?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Madam Chair. So back in the day, when Smart Scale was first starting up, we looked at safety for transit and we just said it was, I mean, transit is the safest mode, right? So there really wasn't a score for transit. It was already assumed that, because it is a safe mode. So I'm not sure how you're thinking of, assessing.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think, Miles, correct me if I've got this wrong, but you were looking at how many single vehicle crashes would be reduced as a result of increased transit.
Exactly. So it's a VMT shift and then using that as a stand-in for reduction in crashes.
Okay. Well, that's a really hard measure.
So, if you were serving a high volume corridor that had a lot of crashes, then that project would score higher than transit on a low volume roadway without very many crashes.
I mean, you might look at it by dedicated guideway, right? What's a percentage of the system that's actually in a dedicated lane or guideway?
Yep.
I mean, that would actually provide the most in that manner. That would be the safest, right? And cause the least amount of vehicular incidents because it's not a mixed traffic.
Right.
So I know Dorana has her hand up, but just really quick to follow up, shows you how much I've been paying attention to our merit process. We do provide some measures for safety, but they are related to kind of 4 points. And I can share this with the CVTA staff and with the larger group because we have this up as a technical guidance document. but we actually provide kind of just point values related to if there's any technology related improvements. So like cameras or crash avoidance systems for transit, since that data, like again, for crashes, it's not exactly a high frequency. So it's hard for us to really understand the number of incidences that are related to buses in terms of crashes, whether that's vehicle or pedestrian. We also look at customer facility improvements. So like if you're doing anything in terms of pedestrian access or lighting, anything that's related to bus stop improvements, that's also a component. And then anything that improves kind of related to safety or emergency response. So if like transit's also, that route may be used for emergency evacuation or to be able to help with any kind of improvements that may help with like police related incidences or fire prevention. And the last one is related to just the asset condition. So, I mean, because safety applies to both for our projects can be both vehicle to and facility, but anything that could reduce the risk of accidents is. So that's kind of what we do because, as Amy pointed out, it's kind of not the same thing when you think about safety in terms of crashes for transit.
You're right. Okay. Dyrona?
Yeah, thank you so much both to Amy and GRPT for, I think those are definitely some good starting points. Because when we think about, the safety we talk about, I like the dedicated guideway in that putting in, sidewalks and all of those types of things when you build these projects should be something that, potentially helps with a project scoring.
Okay. Frank?
Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking through what everybody had said, and it's a bit difficult. So Miles, help me here. You're saying that we're looking at safety in this regard as um if you take a corridor, we're looking at the mode shift pretty much, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it's I don't know if that is completely true, but um if you look at, let's say, a lookout route, right, or a couple of lookout routes compared to an express route, lookout route does not necessarily mean that it's going to be a mode shift, because of the type of people that it's serving or the group of people that it's serving. Unlike an express route that you can make the argument for a mode shift. I don't know if so. For me, that is it makes it difficult. And also I don't know if we're saying that because just like what Tiffany said, if you have a project and it's a transit project, I was looking at it from the perspective of, oh, because of that transit project, there are going to be some sort of improvements in that corridor that is going to help with the safety component. But it sounds like that is not the case. It sounds like in this case, we are looking at pretty much a mode shift. So the less that people drive, we're assuming that the less then there'll be the reduction in traffic accidents.
Okay. Thanks, Frank. Amy?
Just one more quick thought. So, I mean, wouldn't you have to have ridership information to understand like what is the existing ridership and then kind of what is your, new ridership in order to be able to say this many riders is now going to benefit from this from a safety perspective, the way it's currently being calculated?
And we do. We request that from all of the applicants doing transit projects.
Okay. Dyrona?
Sorry, I forgot now.
Sorry, I was just
Okay.
asking. So are we saying that if you get the ridership information and let's say projected ridership information, right? Are we saying an increase in ridership necessarily assume that there's going to be a mode shift?
Right. Yeah, that you said that before, right?
Well, I was saying, I was asking a question in response to what Amy said, because I was trying to get a good understanding of what she was saying.
Oh, Yeah, I mean, how are you going to calculate it, right? So, that percentage of new riders that are now coming over, how are you calculating that? Where's that number coming from? So if they're providing the ridership and you have existing, riders, and now you're making the investment, so now you have net new riders, right, coming onto the system. Is that the number you're looking at? And this reminds me, and I don't know if they still calculate this, but it reminds me of the transit system user benefits, right? That FTA used to use, that looks at what is the benefit of the service for existing riders, not new riders, but existing riders, right? So that's another measure, but it is a good measure. It's challenging to get to, especially probably for the level of ridership data that you're going to have when you're making these applications. But that may be another way to think about how to get at that number.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I was just saying that with the new riders coming on board, right? How do you determine that these are people that drive and that
Exactly.
there's going to be a mode shift?
Yep. Agreed.
Well, I would suggest.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
everyone. I would suggest that we put together a small subcommittee of folks to work on the transit category measures, because it seems like we are going to revisit some of these measures in a more comprehensive way. So if that is all right, please let me know if you want to participate and if you have the time to participate, because we do need to work on this quickly and get it resolved so that we can get the framework document completed. So if you have the time and you have the interest in helping with that, let me know.
Barb,
Yes.
this is Diana.
Uh-huh.
I would love to work on it. And when you say the time, could you tell us what are the constraints for that?
I would like to try to work on it in the next month so that we can present something at our next TAC meeting.
Okay, for December.
Yeah. Todd?
I will volunteer.
Thank you.
Yes, Bob, this is Frank. Please count me in.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'll help too. I think I sent you an email.
Alrighty.
And then Barb, either Wood or myself would be available to help you all. And I'll make sure to share the technical guidance that I was referencing so that you can have a look at the safety section there.
Okay. All right.
Barb,
Sounds good.
I don't need to say that I'll help, do I?
No, yeah, you're
I'm assuming that I'm
looped in already.
included. If you're helping, then I'm helping too.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good, everyone. All right, so we're gonna table transit for a little bit so we can work on that offline. Let me get back to that presentation. Hopefully I can get it. I swear, I don't understand this.
Would you like me to share it, Barb?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, that's where we were. The next item is deobligation process, and this is pending adoption by the full authority. So we can move on from that. So we talked about transit, talked about deobligation. So now we're to our discussion about PE only projects versus the use of leveraging dollars for PE. And then another item that we're going to touch on, which is related, is funding limits for PE only in studies. So the slide that's up here now, let me get so I can see that. This is a snippet out of the framework, and I've highlighted the sentences that I think are pertinent to using leveraging funds for PE. So projects with funding intended for leveraging are not considered active projects until fully funded. And down below, the sponsor may request. Sorry, it dropped me again. The sponsor may request a portion of the leveraging funds in the amount necessary to develop 30% plans for the original scope. And the request for PE funds must be made prior to the next CVTA regional application cycle. All right, next slide. So when we, can you go back? So when we wrote it up that way, we were trying to limit the investment of CVTA regional dollars into project development without an identified funding source for construction. So we didn't want to put all of our money, to take it to an extreme, into plans and not have delivered improvements to the public. So we put those safeguards in there for that reason. Let me just look through this real quick, make sure I. Okay, next slide, please. We also have the caps on the amount of funding that can go towards PE only projects, which is 10% of the annual regional funding, so about $6.5 million. And again, that limits the use of regional dollars without actually getting projects to construction. But it might also limit the availability of shovel-ready projects that can move to construction quickly, which could be desirable for bonding situations. And I think I said it last time, I'm not an expert on bonding. All I can draw on is our which was the terms of the bonding required the money to be spent pretty quickly. So, you know, you need to be in the construction phase to be able to spend significant amount of money in a hurry. So that's what we have on the table. You know, there are pros and cons to investing our money into PE only projects. And we need to talk that through and decide if we want to increase those caps, if we want to change the framework document as far as the use of leveraging dollars for PE only. We do have a category where you can submit for PE only projects and be able to move those projects along. Okay, I'm opening it up to discussion. Todd?
So under the, oh, can you put that slide back up? I was going to read from that. Thank you. So, top line, CVTA regional funds applied to studies should not exceed 5% of the annual CVTA regional funding. Is that per round, which we're now on a 2-year cycle? So is that 10% over 2 years? How do we measure that?
We'll need to talk about that. That's the purpose of today's discussion, you know.
Well, I guess in order to know what needs to change, if anything, I guess I'm trying to figure out what.
I would interpret that as being 6.5 per year. So in a round, we could fund up to 13 million. The language here is really smushy, you know, should not. So this is not hard and fast. And we definitely left it that way to have flexibility. And that was one of the options is, we can leave it as is because we do have this smushy language in here. And, as we go through a funding cycle, if there are projects submitted for PE only, we can have discussion whether we think it is suitable or to fund more than the 6.5 per year towards projects that are PE only.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Chet?
I think that the language itself says annual CVTA funding, so I think a fix could be to stick to annual CVTA funding and then just take out the numbers. But yeah, when this was written, it was that we were doing this once a year, not once every 2 years.
Yeah, I agree that it makes sense to get rid of approximately 6.5 because that's going to change
Right.
through the years. But do you agree that it would be 10% of the annual times 2?
Correct.
Yeah. Dorona?
Sorry, I've been playing like hands up, hands down. So I'm just thinking, if we take a look at our current regional project list, there's a number, and we've come up with deobligation, and now we're talking about this. There are a number of them that probably could go into typically all the money stripped from them except for 30% of the project cost. If we're really trying to, free up dollars in that, some form of programming that really puts these projects into as a group, kind of where they're moving through the phases, and how we do this. I mean, it really becomes, of course, who can play the game the best. And I only say that we have projects that forego any leveraging requests that are large sums of amounts that are scored uh, for the entire project cost to be covered. But then and then we argue whether or not they're ready when a lot of them are literally under the 30% in some cases. I won't say everyone's. When we're talking about some of the big ones that are holding up dollars. So, I mean, I just asked the group's thought on that as we look at it. I mean, yeah, we can remove the 6.5 million, but again, as a strategy, is it even effective for, that number not to even have the 10% if you're seeing the batch of projects that come in? So, I mean, those are just some of my thoughts as we're reviewing this.
Okay. Let me see if I understand. I would say probably the majority of the projects that are submitted have not started PE because they don't have a funding source. Not necessarily all of them. But are you proposing that anything that's been through that's getting ready for deallocation, any project that's eligible for eligible sounds like it's a great thing, but any project that's subject to deallocation, we would leave 30% or enough money to accomplish 30% plans without, no matter what the project is. Is that what you're proposing?
I mean, it could be. I mean, you've tied it to the deallocation, but just in using that as an example of us having discussed those. But yeah, I do think that there's some looking at this as a holistic, as the projects we have on the books, as the ones we see in the future plan, put out in our big universal list. I just think that we have to be realistic when we, are looking at these items and doing what's right for the region.
Okay. Miles?
Thanks. Dorena's comments just now had me sort of wondering and sort of how applying this moving forward. So when we're converting leveraging requests to 30% design requests, are those included in our 10% budget? So because we're going to exceed that if we have a lot of leveraging and we're starting to convert those over, does that then get factored in? I just, for us developing allocations and recommendations, I think that would be important to clarify because those are, and I haven't done the math, but that just based on what we have, that's easily going to exceed our 6.5 million a year.
Right, which that's the discussion, is whether we think it is, whether we need to have some sort of guardrails up to ensure that we're not spending a bunch of CVTA regional money on design without having clear identified funding sources to take those projects to construction.
If I may, Madam Chair, I guess my question was those don't come in as PE projects. Those are getting converted to PE projects, and it's a second review, so it's not part of the allocation, the general allocation process that we go through.
Right.
So trying to figure out, do we recalculate the threshold? Then I think that might be part of what we should include in the conversation of how we factor that in.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So if we're going to have a cap, we do need to think about, in my opinion, the money that is going to PE only efforts coming out of the leveraging. Amy?
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. So I think that this is a great discussion for, sort of carving out some PE only money. But I think at our meeting last month, the discussion was, can we go ahead and execute an agreement in order to begin PE on a project that has not been fully funded and was awarded money for leverage, right? So
that is one of the issues, yes.
Yeah. So to me, that's, maybe we kind of need to think about that first.
Okay.
Because that sort of gets at the root of this whole question about PE. And should people have already should they have, maybe applied for PE only?
Exactly.
And that's, I guess, to me, the dollar amount might be one thing that we need to address if we need to do more PE, but why didn't the applicants go ahead and just apply for the PE, knowing that they needed to do that?
So can you move up, Chet, to the slide that talks about that out of the framework document?
I just did. Is that the right one?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had the snippet out of the framework document that talks about using leveraging for PE. And the language that's in there currently says that projects with funding intended for leveraging are not considered active projects until fully funded. So PE only funding request, if you were to submit an application like Amy is suggesting for a PE only project, then you can begin design right away. But if you
We can't hear you, Barb.
Sorry, my Zoom drops like every 10 minutes. So if you were trying to use leveraging dollars for PE, then you need to wait until your project is evaluated for the other funding source before you make that request. That's the way it's written now. And then another constraint is that you can use leveraging funds up to for 30% plans. And secondly, that you make the request before the next cycle begins. So if there's objections to this language, we should talk about that. Dirona?
Thanks, Barb. I mean, I think you made a good point with this slide, that excludes maybe the one with the percentages. Is that a way for those that may want to start the PE? Again, is the request through the CVTA? And we have a mid or open cycle, right?
Currently,
Not right now.
Are we sure? I thought we were having, I thought
so
we put it, what, is this getting that approved?
no, right now, after Smart Scale, if there are projects that had leveraging on them and they were not selected for Smart Scale, people could request some of that leveraging dollars to be used to develop 30% plans.
So I just thought, and Chessa, can you fact check me? I thought somewhere in here we have something on even the calendar dates, on proposed calendar dates of these actions. Opening of cycles. Or chat, I'm just trying to get the clear date on when the next.
I don't think we set a window. You mean for the request to change portion of your leveraging to PE only?
Yeah,
Like a
I'm
window?
trying to see, is that like,
I don't think we set a window for that specific request. I think now,
No, I think that's ongoing.
yeah, okay.
okay, but yeah, so ongoing meaning that typically a locality can come to the authority and ask for the PE funds to go into an agreement with VDOT per se, if that was the case. Todd, do you understand what I'm asking?
Not really, but maybe my question will help address that.
Well, yeah, and so what I was just saying, if Madam Chair, if I could, I was just
Sure.
saying, if it's a simple request to the authority, because Amy, if you're correct, I thought they were potentially asking for an agreement, and if not, you're okay with whenever that agreement can take place?
Me?
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
no,
you're
I
okay with it.
don't. So I think the way it's written in the language, right, in the framework document is that if you've submitted a project for leverage only, then that funding is not active until it's been fully funded, right? So that's the way the language is now. What we've been asked is, can we execute a project agreement, a SPA, for a project that has received leverage only, and now we want to just execute an agreement for the PE. So that's what's under discussion right now, which prompted all of this. I don't think the next window cycle would maybe be next year, because right now we're currently in a cycle that we've just submitted the smart scale. So another opportunity wouldn't be available until maybe next year. And that would just be dependent on how much money is available, or if they've gone through the smart scale process and they weren't awarded money, but then they've come back and asked, hey, can we use a small portion to go ahead and do the PE? Now, whether that request can happen before or after smart scale, I mean, I think that to me is the discussion, right? Whether we're going to allow PE to occur before smart scale, even though it's been leveraged, or we're not. We're going to stick with the language as it is.
Let me jump in there. So
Okay.
if someone were to have a leveraging request and the smart scale cycle hadn't closed yet, and they're asking to use some of that leveraging for design, if they would need to replace the leveraging that they've promised on that application with something.
Exactly.
And if they have another source, you may as well use your other source to do the design.
Right. And that's, I mean, if I may just jump in and sort of follow up on that, was my concern, is if we go ahead and advance a project agreement just for PE, because VDOT may be wanting to do that, before we know if it's been awarded, smart scale funding, then does that put our leverage in jeopardy? And, unless we have an agreement with VDOT in writing stating that they will honor that as leverage, to me, that is a risk that I would not be worth taking on my project.
Right. I think VDOT would hold you to the leveraging amount.
Yeah,
that dollar
exactly.
amount.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're effectively, if you do that, you're effectively reducing your leverage amount. And then you have to replace it either on your own, or in our case, we're just using our local money to get these items done, right?
Mhm.
Because we don't want to jeopardize our leverage.
Mhm. Okay. Todd?
So, two things. First off, I agree that on the bullet about the request for PE funds for the leveraging amount must be made prior to the next CVTA regional application cycle. And assuming that the leverage is for smart scale, keeping in mind there's other funding programs with other timelines. And keeping in mind that these projects take a long time to get through the approval process at TAC, Finance, and full authority to be able to use a portion of that money for advancing PE. I think it's reasonable to look at the windows that we have to work with. So, for example, if smart scale scores are coming out in January, we kind of have a relative idea of how a project is scoring, as opposed to waiting for the full award by CTP of smart scale, which is what, June. And then we're immediately turning around and doing next round of CVTA regional. So I think as long as we're flexible on, what that date for that request, I think it's probably would work better.
Yeah, I agree that there's, you can see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
Come January, February, and we can have some discussions at that time before it, gets officially adopted by the CTB.
Right, and by the time we go through the SPA process and approvals and everything, we probably would know for definite. So if, things move around and it gets funded, then it's kind of you pull the request.
Yep, that makes sense. Do you think we need some clarifying language, or can we just leave it as is?
I'm good with it as it is. The other point I was going to make real quick is we have the PE only projects, which generally would assume would be full, 100% PE versus the portion of the leverage money that would get you to 30% plan. So that's generally going to be a lesser amount depending on the size of the project. So do we count that 30% plan development as part of that total cap on the percentage of PE?
Yeah, I feel like it should be counted as part of the PE cap.
I'm not saying it shouldn't, just it's a little bit.
Clarify that?
Yeah.
Okay.
All leveraging, whether it was converted or original request, counts towards the cap.
Yeah, we can add some language there. Okay, how are we doing? I feel like we're clear on this leveraging for PE. The caps, we can leave the language. We can get rid of these approximately amounts since those will change. And we can leave the wording as it is because it is flexible. It doesn't say shall not. says should not. Or we can talk about increasing those percentages if we think that it makes sense to have more projects shovel ready for bonding. And there are pluses and minuses. So we're back to this item.
Madam Chair, one quick question.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So one, to address the biannual, so I know I heard some language on it. So should not exceed 10% of the annual CVT regional funding, even cutting off the other part. So annual, is that biannual, or is that just the number that we see in the 6-year plan?
It would be, if we're looking at projects every 2 years, it would be the first and second year total. So roughly 13 million, if the 6.5 is good. Or, yeah, I think that's the best way to word it. Does that make sense? All right, Amy?
Sorry, I think bringing up the bonding question is really good. And maybe when we have a little more direction in terms of when and how much, once they get through the bond validation process, maybe there could be a call for projects that are specific for PE to help develop those projects that are going to require bonding. So, I mean, in our program right now, there were projects that were, clearly not going to be funded by CVTA or even Smart Scale alone, right? And maybe not even some other of the federal programs. It's going to require additional money when you get into the $100 million, $300 million projects. So to me, that's where we say, okay, on these large scale projects that are most likely going to need bonding, those projects should receive more funding for PE to get them ready. Because if they're not shovel ready, then they shouldn't be bonded, right? Because we're not going to go out and issue bonds on projects that are just going to sit around. So
take too long to develop.
Right. So get them to the point of where they are shovel ready and maybe identify what those projects are. I think it's obvious what they are. And then that to me does sort of take the pressure off of the regional program cycle, right? If we can find those projects, pull them out and target them for bonding, give them the money for what they need to do the project development and the PE. Knowing that that's sort of the end game for those projects.
Okay. How would folks feel if we, as a separate item on our agenda, separate from the framework document, had staff take a look at the projects submitted last round and projects that are that can't be delivered just with CVTA money alone, that seem to be potential bonding candidates. So we can look at that preliminary list and people can weigh in whether there are other projects that they have in their back pocket that they're thinking about that might need to be included in the list as well. And we can talk about that, some strategies to get those projects ready. Not necessarily being able to make a quick decision, but just start the discussion like Amy's suggesting. That seems like a good strategy, Amy.
Okay, thanks.
Chessa?
Well, I should have probably lowered my hand. That's what I was going to say too. It'd be good to be ready if they're working on bond validation now, and that's 9 months or whatever. And then you do the call for projects. Then it takes you another year to get your, however long to get your projects ready. Then we want to be ready when they say they're ready to sell bonds, I want to be ready to go with my project. So that's a good next step, I think, too.
Okay. All right. We'll put that on the agenda for next time. With that in mind, I would recommend, oh, yeah, here's a slide. Here's last round's request for PE only in studies. So in the PE category, that amounted to 8.5 million. Yeah, roughly $8.5 million. So that well exceeded 10% of our annual, but not when you double it, right, for 2 years. So we were okay that way. And studies, that was very small. So I think that fits. So we're good. I would suggest that we leave the language in the framework as is, just eliminating that approximately number, that little phrase at the end of both sentences for studies and PE only. And, recognize that we've got this flexible language with should. We did a sniff test on what happened last round. We seem okay. We're going to move the item about shovel-ready projects for bonding to a separate agenda item for discussion during our future meetings. Dorona?
Hey, Barb, thank you. I mean, sorry, y'all, but just thinking about, we didn't have Richmond Connects when this round of the past round came out. We didn't have the outcome.
Mhm.
So we do have the outcome now. And, I just think that the 10% is a little low for eligible projects. But that's just, again, that was like what, 2 to 3 localities participating in the PE. And again, just adding, I know some from Richmond and potentially others. I just think that the 10% may be low, but reflective of the authority having approved the 10%, and everyone else is okay with approving it, then we can leave it there. But I do know, and I guess we'll let the competitive process play out when those projects go in for those dollars. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, the 10% is very smushy, very smushy. We're not going to be hard and fast on that, but we do want to be a little cautious that we're just not putting all of our money towards plans. Okay, I appreciate that input. Anybody else? All right, so I'm going to wrap up. We're going to have a subcommittee to work on the transit measures as a whole, all of them. And we're going to try to meet and come to some resolution to present to the TAC at our next meeting in December. And we're also going to have as an agenda item in December a list of projects that seem like they might be potential bond projects, so we can talk more about how we can get those projects ready, get some design done for those. I think that's it.
And Barb, just to clarify, the transit measures, that is you, Todd, Amy, and Dorota. Is that right?
Frank.
And Frank.
Trisha Robinson. Tiffany
okay.
or
Tiffany
Wood.
Right.
Yeah. Big group. We all got to get along.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Woo! Item number 8, Fall Line Trail long-term management. Chet.
Thank you. So this is in your agenda packet. Essentially where we are in this process. This is something that's been going on for a while, this discussion about fall line trail management. And it's kind of ping pong between TAC to fall line work group when there was special details to look at. Came back to TAC a couple months ago, and at this point, we are at a point to possibly recommend, I think the right term would be acceptance of this report by the full authority. And the reason we're here is because CVTA was not created to be a trail manager. We don't have the expertise to do that. There are other mechanisms that are in place for current trails, as well as future trail segments that are being developed right now, where that management can be overseen and coordinated. And I think the reason we're here is because CVTA is the primary funder of the fall line at this point. And we want to make sure that that we're good stewards of the funding that's been committed and that the trail gets developed the right way. So what we have put together at the direction of TAC is a summary of all of the possible, best practices, resources, details that could be provided as VDOT and localities move forward with identifying management agreements. And it does contain a summary of a lot of these documents, and then appendices with full documents included. And just to walk through that quickly, hitting the numbered headers. Staff put together the first item, number 1.0, is a document that was put together. It's an outline summary that was discussed at the September TAC meeting, identifying all the different key responsibilities for coordinating organization to think about when you're looking at a trail of this magnitude. We did ask for fall line work group feedback on that document. So 1.1 includes a summary of feedback from both the Virginia Capital Trail Foundation as well as sports backers. And then their full documents are in the appendices, their full responses. Item 2.0 is a summary of different management agreements and reports that already exist. The first one, 2.1, is the MOA for the Virginia Capital Trail between the Virginia Capital Trail Foundation and VDOT. This was signed in 2017 and was established after the completion of the facility, and is the final agreement that supersedes everything that was done beforehand. So a bulleted summary there, but then the full MOA is in the appendix. 2.2 is the memorandum of agreement for the Fall Line Trail, and this is between VDOT and Henrico County. So this is the management agreement for their Henrico sections that are being developed at this point. 2.3 is the Virginia Capital Trail Sponsorship and Maintenance Report. This was produced in 2019 at the request of the General Assembly, and it was put together by both Secretariats of Transportation as well as Natural Resources to provide a detailed history of the project, including funding for construction, relationships and agreements between VDOT, Capital Trail Foundation, and the localities for operations and maintenance. So good resource document. Again, the full thing is in the appendix. And then 2.4 is the Fall Line Trail white paper that was put together by Plan RVA, which was, if you remember, a comparative summary of other organizations and foundations, agencies that do similar types of work, including the BCTF, the Sports Backers, Maymont Foundation, the Path Foundation in Atlanta, different authorities, coalitions, conservancies, and DOT, and how they all approach those types of projects. And then 3.0 is a summary from VDOT of, this was a request from the TAC for the Fall Line Trails miles per jurisdiction. So this was a summary of a request to get a better understanding of the mileage in each jurisdiction and what the management responsibilities were according to those segments. And we do have the map that you see in the document is what was provided back by VDOT last week, showing 31 miles that will be VDOT maintained and 12 miles that will be locality maintained. I am still waiting on more detailed GIS data and information from VDOT on what those different arrangements look like in terms of, practically what is included in the management here versus the management there. And we'll be happy to pass that along to TAC members once we receive it. So that is a quick summary. After the map is all the different appendices with the main documents in it. But hopefully, Madam Chair, this covers what the request was of staff. And like I said, we're here to help. We want to make sure that the CVTA sees a good return on its investment and just do whatever we can to make sure that the different segments of the fall line continue forward with investment and implementation.
Okay, yep, great. So I think this is going to be a really good, it's going to be a really good resource for localities to have some conversations and make some decisions regarding long-term management of the trail. Dyrona?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just reading through and I get a little bit confused, specifically on page 11 of the agenda packet, but 5 of the draft report. Chat at the bottom of that page. It says like the report estimates a total cost of, whatever for the cost of administration and maintenance of the Virginia Capitol Trail. And then talks about the New River Trail. Then when you go into the next page at the top, number 1, it says a Virginia Capitol Trail Master Plan. And then at the number 4, it says VDOT and Capitol Trail jurisdiction. I was just trying to wonder, was that, because as I'm reading it in the top, I hear you describing each of those types of dollars per mile. And then it says the report concludes with the following recommendation. We are talking about, and I look at it, we're talking about this report that Plan RVA is doing. And then I see Virginia Capitol Trail Master Plan, and that, is that supposed to be fall line trail or?
No, I'm sorry for any confusion. That section is a summary of the General Assembly report that was done in 2019. So this is just what the General Assembly report came up with.
For the Virginia Capitol Trail.
Correct.
So it's just a reference document, because whatever they're doing on the Capitol Trail is probably pertinent to the Fall Line Trail. So this report that was prepared in 2019 is just in there as a resource document.
Okay, so I just think, hold on, you guys have confused me.
So 2.3 is focused on that General Assembly report.
Well, I'm just trying to figure. So it starts off, the ownership is CVTA, and then by the end, it's excerpts from the General Assembly. I know that the other report had references, so I'm just trying to figure out exactly.
So starting on page 7 of the agenda packet, is a summary of all of these reference documents that have been put together regarding that could be informative in trying to figure out long-term management of the Fall Line Trail. So we have the white paper. We've got the white paper that filled it at the beginning. We've got the document that CVTA staff put together about management responsibilities following the meeting with sports backers and Capital Trail Foundation. We have agreements that are already in place between Henrico, VDOT, Capital Trail Foundation, and VDOT. So these are all references and resources to help localities and the trail owner talk about long-term management.
Okay, so like we go 2.0 on page 9, and then memorandum of agreement is all Virginia Capital Trail. And then the memorandum of agreement Fall Line. Okay, I don't know. I mean, it's my first time seeing it in this compilation.
It's really all the things that we've been talking about for the past few months, just all packaged up together.
Yeah, it's literally packaged. It's just all like together like that. And I don't know. All right.
So no conclusions. It's just a reference document. Amy?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I guess once we approve, I guess, recommend this to go to the full board for acceptance, right? Not approval, but an acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's just a reference document.
Yes, correct.
And then what happens, I guess, with the Fall Line Trail Working Group? Does it continue to exist, or what is its purpose continue to be as it relates to CVTA?
Well, that's a good question. We've completed the wayfinding.
Right.
With acceptance of this document, that's complete. There was a design guide that had been under, but I think that's fallen off because we've got design build 1 and 2 underway. You know, we can talk about some of the issues that still are out there, which is funding the remainder of the trail, how we might get that done, and talking about maintenance, how we get some dedicated sources, dedicated funding for maintenance. I think those are kind of the 2 items: funding for completion, and then funding for maintenance of the trail long term. All right. Anyone else? All right. Is there anyone who would make a motion to recommend the full authority accept this report as complete?
This is Sharon Smidler. I make a motion.
Thanks,
to
Sharon.
accept this report is complete. Thank you.
Is there a second?
This is Amy. I'll second.
Thank you. We'll take a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? And are there any abstentions? Okay, great. Moving on to item number 9, which is round 4 CVTA regional application process timeframe.
Thank you.
I think has revised the roadmap.
Revise the roadmap. So this should reflect starting in June of 2025, the updated schedule that would fit with what we've been discussing in terms of the framework. So we added the extra time in the fall for review and estimate feedback and all the different components that we've discussed in detail over the last few months. The meeting dates should match upcoming meeting dates for TAC Finance as well as the full authority. And at this point, you're just seeing it today for the first time, but I'd ask everyone to take a look and see if anything looks strange to you that we might need to go back and take a look at. I tried to make sure that, the dates fell during a week and there was enough time so that there were concurrent processes happening together. I think it should fit fairly well so that we do have that extra review time at the TAC level and still have enough time set aside at the end for public review, all the legal stuff, and the full vetting by the Finance Committee as well as the full authority. So at this point, I'm just no action, just discussion. Madam Chair, just asking everyone to take a look at this and maybe we can put this back on the agenda for one of the next few TAC meetings.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, take a look and put some dates on your calendar. We'll talk about that at our next meeting as well. Any questions? All right, moving on to number 10, fall line wayfinding reimbursement process. Chet.
Okay, you can still hear me, right? Okay.
Yes.
So the action that the authority took last month, I believe it was last month, was to set aside $1.5 million for fall line wayfinding implementation. So now that we have that commitment, I've been talking to our fiscal agent about how to actually formalize that. And together with legal counsel, I think that the right direction to go would be to look at wayfinding reimbursements as an amendment to make to any of the existing SPAs that are in place for fall line projects, so that we don't have to create new legal agreements, no new reimbursement mechanisms. We would amend existing SPAs and use the general budgeting that was provided by AB Design per locality, so that we can then not have to go through an adoption process for a new agreement, new legal structures, anything like that, and be able to process those reimbursement requests just like we would for any other expense that came about as part of that section of the trail. That's a real quick walkthrough, and this is really still just hypothetical, but before I proceeded any further with the lawyers, I wanted to make sure that it made sense to TAC members who are, especially the ones who have already started processing reimbursement requests, if that made sense in terms of a process timeline.
Got the thumbs up from Dyrona. Yeah, with Enrico, as far along as you all are, it would be good to hear if you think that'll work. It seems like a good approach to me. Chet and I talked about this a little bit ahead of time, and I can see the potential for some wayfinding happening initially with construction of a trail, but then as sections are added to it, you might need to come back to that same section of trail and add more wayfinding. We're building a little teeny section, and it doesn't make sense for us to direct people all the way to Chester with this one small section in place, but there might be something we could do with the first phase. So I think it'll be installing the wayfinding might happen in stages as sections are built. All right. Any other comments on that?
No, I agree, Barb. This is Sharon with Henrico.
Okay, thanks. All right, item number 11, CVTA TAC member comments. Does anyone have any exciting news to share with the group? Or even mundane? All right, seeing none. Our next meeting is going to be December 9th. We've got a lot on the agenda already. So we'll be talking about transit, framework document transit, and we'll have the item about bonding. We'll also have the round 4 CVTA regional application process timeframe on the agenda to review comments after you guys have had a chance to look at it some. Chet?
Whoops, there we go. Just a scheduling note, there is no December meeting of the full authority. It is a joint annual meeting with TPO and Plan RVA. So the next full authority meeting where any action would take place after next Friday would be, I believe it's January 31st. So there is a little bit of time to get anything in place for, January 31st.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, if that's all, we're adjourned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.